Good morning, everyone. Welcome. We are waiting a little while for people to join us in the Zoom webinar room. Go ahead and get yourself situated with some coffee, water. Thanks for being with us. Hello, everyone, and welcome. We are going to spend another minute or two getting some other folks into the Zoom room. Happy to have you with us for our last cafe of the season, Healing Strategies, Arts Organizations, Leaning In to the Mental Health Crisis. We're going to get started in just a moment. All right, I think we're ready to go. Good morning and welcome to Outreach's Cultural Access Forum and Exchange 2022 season and our final presentation, Healing Strategies, Arts Organizations, Leaning Into the Mental Health Crisis. Thank you for being with us and supporting us through your donations. My name is Katie Sampson. I am the Director of Education at Outreach. I use she, her pronouns. I am a white disabled woman in her early 40s with blonde hair and freckles. I am seated in a power wheelchair, wearing a black blouse, and behind me is a mustard yellow colored wall with blurred out framed pictures and books. For those of you who are with us for the first time, Outreach is a nonprofit organization based in Philadelphia. We create, advocate, and expand accessible opportunities so the full spectrum of society is served. We are joined together in acknowledging the Lenape Nation on whose traditional territory Outreach is settled. We acknowledge them as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land and seek to build more awareness and steward this relationship to the territory as settlers. I am also joined by my Outreach colleague, Alex Boyle, assisting with technology. We are also joined with our cart captioner provided by DHCC. To view captions, select the icon at the bottom of the screen. We are also joined by 2 ASL interpreters for Hands Up Productions. Thank you for being with us. Should you wish to ask questions during our Q&A portion of today's webinar, you may use the Q&A button at the bottom of the screen. You can also raise your hand button in the lower screen and we can unmute you to voice your questions. If you are calling in and you would like to ask a question, you may also press #9 on your phone and that will also raise your hand. Please use the chat for tech and accessibility questions. This session will also be recorded and posted for future viewing. I am thrilled for today's discussion. Each of our panelists today have been invited to guide us through their process and role in bringing awareness, programming, advocacy, and intentionality into their work. Each panelist will spend approximately 15 minutes giving us an overview of who they are and their work. But before we do that, I knew this topic was going to bring about a lot of great dialogue, and I couldn't think of anyone better and more apt to moderate this panel than my former supervisor and Vice President of Public Education, Engagement, and Museum Operations, our moderator for today, Monica Zimmerman. I am going to stop screen sharing and allow Monica to show her video. So welcome, Monica.
Thank you so much, Katie, and thank you, audiences, for joining us today. I am Monica Zimmerman. I also use she, her pronouns, and I am the Vice President of Public Education, Engagement, and Museum Operations at the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts. I am on screen with you now with a pile of very recognizable gray curls, a big smile, and a poster designed by art students in my background that describes a more equitable art world they would like to live and work in the future. I am so honored to help make this conversation happen today and to learn as much as possible from my peers. And I want to thank ArtReach for the invitation to participate. At the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, where I work, we've developed a robust program around treating the whole patient for medical and nursing students. We taught about 280 students in the last academic year. And with this work, we're thinking about the ripple effect of more humanistic thinking by better trained healthcare practitioners. In my mind, this is a wildly important part of the future of museums if they are going to truly serve contemporary audiences well. We must continue to invest in new ideas of what service looks like, what value looks like, and what impact looks like. I am proud, quite proud of what we do at PAFA and happy to answer any questions about our program design for practitioners at the end of today. But today's panelists are doing different and really exciting work with audiences themselves, centering the need to address the mental and emotional traumas of audiences directly. And I'm thrilled to be listening to them with you today. This is such important work. So please welcome our first presenters this morning, Tripita B. Mason and Yolanda Wisher, to present on their work with the Healing Verse poetry line. Yolanda and Tripita, welcome.
Thanks, Monica. Thanks for having us, ArtReach. Great to be here. Hey, Tripita.
Hey, very nice to be here. Thank you for having us in this space.
So we have a presentation to share, and we'll start out and do some image descriptions first. I'm Yolanda Wisher. I'm a Black woman in her 40s. I have a nice full fro and black glasses, and I'm wearing a black button-up shirt, and behind me is a wall of my beloved books. And the slide that you're seeing here reads Healing Verse Poetry Line, features the words Healing Verse Poetry Line in orange on a blue background with the Philadelphia Contemporary logo in the bottom right-hand corner. Next slide, please.
The audio, please. I think we're going to play the audio here.
Sorry, folks, just trying to suss out audio here. Thanks for your patience.
No problem.
Hello, and thank you for calling Healing Verse Poetry Line 1855 Poem RX2. I am Trapita B. Mason, founder and curator of Healing Verse, a project that offers hope and inspiration through poems in support of wellness, well-being, and mental health. Healing Verse Poetry Line continues year-round, bringing you a new poem every Monday. This project is supported by Philadelphia Contemporary and sustained by the many gifted poets who have offered their words of healing to the line. For more information about Healing Verse, visit philadelphiacontemporary.org. We gratefully acknowledge the great jazz guitarist Monette Sudler for the use of her music. To hear this week's featured poem, press 1. To hear about resources for mental health and well-being, press 2. To connect directly with the 24/7 National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, press 3. Pressing 0 at any time will take you back to the main menu. Thank you for calling, and remember that poems are healing too.
Yes, indeed, poems are healing too. And this is why Yolanda Wisher and I are with you this morning. My name is Trapita B. Mason. And this morning I am wearing a burgundy shirt and black shirt. I'm a black woman, middle-aged black woman, curly hair. I'm in an office setting, and in my background, there are books and plants and little things scattered about. And you just heard the opening line of our Healing Verse poetry line. And it's really exciting to be here today. Every morning, every Monday, there's a new poem that's centering mental well-being and can be heard on the line 1855 Poem RX2. And this line was launched in January 2021 when I was in my first year, going on the second year of my poet laureate tenure with the city. And really wanted to look at a way to be able to decrease barriers to poetry, while also looking at a way to help support individuals at a time when all of us were feeling isolated, and we're just feeling loss and all these unimaginable feelings because of the pandemic. And so what this line offered was respite for a lot of people and healing. And so poems are entered on the line. Right now, there's a partnership with Philadelphia Contemporary, and the project was originally supported by the Academy of American Poets, the Free Library of Philadelphia, and Cali Writers House. And this toll-free line is available 24/7 and allows callers to call in. Every Monday, the poems are changed and our poets represent people from all over. And we use poetry as a foundation to promote wellness, mental health, mental well-being across the city, country, and the world. Next slide.
Hello, and thank
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about myself. But in this image, you're seeing another picture of this beautiful brown-skinned Black woman with a necklace, orange shirt, braided hair, and earrings. And I look like I have some tools behind me, tools for healing. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. And as I mentioned, I was also the 2020-2021 Philadelphia Poet Laureate. And I am the co-curator and one half of our curating team of the Healing Verse Poetry Line. Next slide, please.
And I mentioned before, my name is Yolanda Wisher. This is another picture of me, a Black woman, loose afro, sitting on a stoop in front of a bright orange door somewhere in Philadelphia. I'm wearing a dark blue shirt with purple stripes, purple pants, and gray and black sneakers. And this is actually my staff photo for Philadelphia Contemporary. I'm the co-director of curatorial programs there, also the curator of spoken word. I'm also a former Philadelphia Poet Laureate from 2016 and 17. And because I know the experience of creating Poet Laureate programs and how difficult that can be, and how much partnerships are important to leveraging the resources to make our creative projects come to life, our creative and civic projects come to life. I was really interested in helping to sustain Tripita's work as a poet laureate through the Healing Verse poetry line. So we invited her to co-curate with me and to give the Healing Verse poetry line a home at Philadelphia Contemporary. And so we support the posting of the poems and the curating of poets and communications with poets, and also promoting the line and facilitating new partnership opportunities to enhance it and to grow it. And super excited that Tripita was willing to share this project with us in this facet, and excited to continue to grow it and think about ways that it can have greater impact. And just a little bit about Philadelphia Contemporary. It was founded in 2016 by Harry Philbrick, and we're a nomadic contemporary arts organization, and our mission is to connect the people and the places of Philadelphia through art and partnership. And we believe in co-creating art with communities anywhere where, and we define art very broadly and the role of the artist very broadly. Next slide, please.
Yeah, so often we're asked, why does this matter? And I shared a little earlier about how, the pandemic, it just seemed like the right time, right? People are dealing with things like distancing and isolation, loss, and just not understanding what's going on. And so it was right. But poetry is right all the time for a lot of reasons. And as a licensed clinical social worker, I've used the narrative form of writing. I've used poetry in many of the civic activities, workshops, in community settings, correctional institutions, schools, to be able to bridge, this gap between, what does poetry mean to people? It's not that high art. It is something that all of us can write poetry, all of us can enter into this art form. So being able to merge it and really understanding that it is a form of, it is an intervention. It can be used as an intervention to foster wellness. And tying poetry to cognitive behavioral health, for example, which is one of the evidence-based practice in working through therapy and working through difficulties. And that connection is real. Poetry allows us to, it encourages relaxation and reflection. This is something that that's also done in therapy or through therapeutic work. Poetry helps honor the individual experiences in the writing of it, in the hearing and listening to other artists. And something that in the clinical world that we talk about a lot is, really understanding people's traumas, understanding who they are based on the experiences they've had, and to have this opportunity to write about it, to have this opportunity to hear other people expressing their life and their situations and understanding through poetry. Poetry also amplifies voices, and that connection too is important to mental well-being and being able to feel heard. And you can feel heard in quiet ways and through your journal on your page, but also the empowerment to be on a phone line where you are listening to someone's words that could almost reflect your experience, but also the act of writing the poetry for a lot of the writers was something that was important for them to release. One of the other important connections is the reframing of stories. Throughout my work in communities where we are writing poetry and you first encounter individuals who say, "I'm not a poet, miss, I'm not a poet." And by the time we get to the end of the workshop, they are so happy that they've written work. We've received emails from individuals, phone calls, and communications about how some people have used the Healing Verse poetry line as a part of their ritual, whether it's group practice, doing it with a group in a community mental health setting, or home right before they do a yoga. And these things have helped them to be able to reframe, to be able to relax. One of the things that Yolanda and I talk about a lot with this project is how it lowers barriers to access. The poetry line is open to all, and everyone can pick up a phone and listen and hear, but also the individuals who are participating in the writing of it, being able to have that access without barrier. And poetry builds community and connections. There's something to be said about all of us being able to pick up a phone line and to be able to call. All of these things that I mentioned really show how poetry can be used to foster mental wellness, because it is an intervention that's directly tied to therapeutic practices. And a lot of clinicians use it in their work. A lot of writers also use it as a way to get individuals to talk, to share, and to express. So it matters, and there are direct connections to the healing nature of poetry and the power that it has. Next slide.
So from an organizational perspective, working on this project has just been really wonderful to promote what we have been building at Philadelphia Contemporary as a program that centers care through our events and through our engagement with audiences. And this was a way for us to extend that care through this difficult time of lack of connection and not being able to really gather in the ways that we want to. And so some of these numbers that we've been collecting or kind of tracking as we've been developing this project with Tripita kind of reflect that the impact that we're trying to have through this project. Each poem is 90 seconds or less. And it's amazing how much information and how much emotion can be translated in such a little bit of time. And how much impact can come from just 90 seconds of a poem every week. We have the line has showcased at least 75 or more poets from Philadelphia and beyond since Tripita started it in January 2021. And each of those poets receives a stipend for their work. And as we poets know, that's not always the case when you get to submit work that you are receiving compensation for it. So we're really proud to be able to continue that. And Tripita, did that very laboriously and lovingly during her term as poet laureate. So we're glad to support artists in that way through this project. And from a social media perspective, it's just been great to continue to use the phone line, this kind of analog way of connecting with people, and also be in the digital realm of connecting through social media. The image that you're seeing on the right here is a social media graphic square with a photo of Martin Wiley, who is a biracial poet with a bald head, glasses, and a goatee. And the square features his name and the following description. Martin Wiley is a Philadelphia-based poet and author of Just More, a collection of poems from Finishing Line Press. And this is an example of one of the social media posts that we create at Philadelphia Contemporary every week to promote the post on the upload on the line, and to let people to drive folks to the line and to remind them that there is this content there that they can take part of. And since we've been posting these, we've had about over 6,700 total call-ins since January 2021 on the line. And almost 20,000 people reached through our social media posts since we've started in January 2022 with this new partnership. So very exciting to track numbers, and interested to learn more about how we can collect information about where we're getting phone calls from. We've gotten submissions from poets as far as India and Dublin in this next round of our call for submissions. So we are broadening our reach, and that's really exciting for us. Next slide. Or actually, there's a little bit of audio we wanted to share here, just to give you a sample of what a poem on the line sounds like. So this is Martin Wiley's Hope.
This is Martin Wiley reading Hope. Hope. Hope is a song you didn't realize you knew the words to until you dared to dance. Hope. Hope is a belief that when your time comes to stride to the front, someone will be there having your back. Hope. Hope births itself in your imagination, feeds on your memory, and lodges within your chest like some gleeful parasite. Hope. Hope is symbiotic and cathartic, helpful and helpless, lost and somehow still your guiding light. It will blister fingers and twist in your hands, slip and fall if you grip too tight. If you let go, if you stare too hard, if you look away. This is Martin Wiley.
We want to end with sharing a few learnings about this project. Obviously, you know, you've heard us in thinking about this out loud, just about how rich a project it is and how much we're learning just through every poem that's posted every week. But there's a lot we can talk about in terms of what we've learned about technology and about poetry through this project. And this slide features a screenshot of a tweet from @Orbigail, a pre-K teacher. And the tweet reads, "One day, my pre-Kers got obsessed with making their own paper phones. So what did we do about it? Turned it into a poetry lesson, of course. Taking cues from Healing Verse poetry line, here's a thread of all my students' poems about what care means and feels like." Under the tweet is a photo of a wall decorated with student work. Next to the photo are the words pre-K Healing Verse. And so I was really excited to get this tweet and to kind of capture this connection with really young people through the phone line, and to think about, you know, the nostalgia of the phone that, as someone born in the 70s, I remember my great grandmother's rotary telephone. And that's why I've always been drawn to phone lines, because I have this very physical connection, a nostalgic connection with the phone. And it's awesome to see that that the phone is still very much a very powerful tool and instrument of connection for people, and also very attractive even to young people. There's still a lot of magic to how a phone call works and how you can connect with another human being with it. And it's also interesting, the connection here between the very analog way of dialing a number and listening to a poem, and using the cell phone as a recording device, which is the primary way that we receive poems from the poets that are involved. We're not asking them to go into a studio and give us a really, you know, high quality, fancy recording. We're using the voice memo apps or whatever apps are available on the cell phone, and then uploading that to this very analog platform. So I think that's just a really unique facet of this program, and a way that it straddles some generations and times. And I'm also just still struck by the way that a phone line transcends geographic boundaries, having this 1-800 number that anyone in the world can connect to starts to braid our world together in some really fascinating, intimate ways that fascinate me as an artist and as a curator. Over to you, Tripika.
Yeah, and I think there's so many learnings from this. But I think Yolanda and I talk about this again often too, about breaking the barriers of the aesthetics and achievements of the poets. The poets are far ranging. The first year of the project, the poets were all from the Philadelphia area or connected somehow to Philadelphia. In the second year, there is global. It's all over the place. But something else that we've added is we're incorporating voices of, you know, individuals who not only work in the field, which we did in the first year in, you know, social work, clinical, different care in fields, but we're also incorporating voices of participants and members who are in places like, you know, community mental health settings and schools and things like that. So it breaks the barrier, you know, and that's really important. The human voice is powerful, whether it's over this analog line and you're able to hear it, but you're there and you're experiencing it. And writing poetry itself is an act of care and healing that everyone can give and have lovingly received. A quick story relating to the suicide line. I have a relative who works on the Philadelphia city suicide line. And so she gets calls all the time. And she shared with me that they had a person that came and contacted them and, you know, for help. They were in crisis. And when they asked the individual, where did you find the number? That was part of their, you know, questions that they asked. And the person said, on the Healing Verse phone line. So initially they thought, you know, hey, they were delusional. Why don't we get a number of a poetry line? But this little story just illustrates the importance of when you are in need, when even something as small as you may think a 90-second poem, it can have so much power, and it does. And that's what the healing verse line, it means a lot to a lot of people. And for some, it's a ritual, it's an activity, but it's communal. It's a community that fosters healing. Next slide.
Yeah, and this slide will just leave you with some ways to find us and connect with us. Of course, you can call the poetry line at 1-855-POEM-RX2, 1-855-763-6792. We also broadcast the poems in partnership with Germantown Community Radio on 92.9 FM. So you can hear a poem from the previous week on the phone line on the radio the next week. You can visit the PhiladelphiaContemporary.org website for the Healing Verse Poetry Line page and learn more about the project overall. And you can follow Philadelphia Contemporary at Philadelphia Contemporary and at Trapeta M, at TRAPETM, and at Yolanda Wisher on IG, and Philadelphia Contemporary on Twitter. Our emails are trapetamason@gmail and yolanda@philadelphiacontemporary.org. And next slide. Thank you so much to Artreach, Katie Sampson, also Trapeta for this incredible visionary project. And thank you all for participating today.
Thank you, Yolanda, and thank you also to Artreach.
This is Monica Zimmerman back on the screen again to say thank you so much. I'm already inspired, and that was presentation one of several. And I also want you both to know I called the poetry line. First thing I did when I woke up this morning was call your phone line. And that is the first thing that I learned from partnering with you on this program today. So thank you for that gift. As you all hopefully know, we will all come together for questions and conversation at the end of the program. So now I am going to introduce and welcome to you Margaret Murray to share her work on the Picture of Health program. Welcome, Margaret.
Thank you so much, Monica. I'm so happy to be here. And thank you, Yolanda and Trapeta. I am so excited to learn about this, and I've also written down the phone number so that I can call in next Monday. My name is Margaret Murray, and I'm the curator of public programs at the Museum of Fine Arts in St. Petersburg, Florida. I am a middle-aged white woman. I have longish, blondish hair, and I'm wearing dark black glasses. I'm sitting in my dining room in front of a painting by the illustrator Corlett Dam, and you can see a snake plant in the lower left corner that needs a little bit of water, apparently. But I am very excited to be here and talk about some of the work that we're doing at the Museum of Fine Arts. We are an encyclopedic museum, which allows us to tell many, many stories across different cultures, eras, and geographies. And one of the beauties of this is that it really allows us to reach everyone in our community and every visitor who comes in, because there is a point of connection with our art for everyone. So I'm going to share my screen really quickly. Bear with me. I had this. Let me see. View slideshow. Here we go. So what we have done at the Museum of Fine Arts is create a suite of wellness programs called Picture of Health, and there are 3 different programs. This came about during the pandemic when the museum was closed. Prior to 2019, we had begun researching ways to bring members of the Alzheimer's and memory care community into the museum for programs. And once the pandemic started, we realized that we would not be able to safely welcome that community into the museum. Even after we opened, we just didn't feel comfortable doing that. But I didn't want the research we had done to go to waste. So I started looking through some of the focus group findings that we had discovered, we held 2 focus groups in the summer of 2018 that gave us a lot of insight into what people felt about the healing capacity of museums and art viewing, and had done a lot of research and spoken to a lot of different museums around the country and in the United Kingdom and Canada. So looking through all of that research, I thought of 3 different programs that we could do. And what this slide shows is the entrance to our museum, 2 columns, and one of our big banners that said, "We will get through this together, St. Pete, Museum of Fine Arts." The first thing that we did is we created a program called Sit, Stay, Heal, HEAL, and that brought therapy dogs into the Museum of Fine Arts. We originally did this for frontline workers only, and it was called Frontline Workers First Friday. But as the program grew and the audience grew, we decided to make sure that it was available to everyone. And on this slide, you can see 3 of our superstars. Noah, who is a black lab, and he is wearing one of our Sit, Stay, Heal bandanas. And then Loki and Cinnamon. Loki is a small, long-haired brindle chihuahua, gray and silver and black. And Cinnamon, who is a Dalmatian, wearing a bright red bow tie. And the 2 of these dogs became best buds, and you can see here that Loki is giving Cinnamon a big old hug. So this became very popular for a number of reasons, but one of the things that really struck home with us is that while everyone else was shut down, therapy dogs were also using their opportunity to do what they do best. They weren't able to visit schools, they weren't able to visit hospitals, so this program also gave therapy dogs and their human companions and trainers an opportunity to go out and do what they do best. And this program continues. We now do it on the 4th Thursday of every month when the museum is open later. So we have therapy dogs at the museum from noon to 8 p.m. once a month, and we always bring 1 dog up to the staff offices as well so that the staff can enjoy our therapy dogs. Here is another photo. Here are 2 photos of therapy dogs in our garden. This is a Great Dane called Gus, and Anne, who is actually a docent at another museum who decided to come by and visit. And then we have on the right Noah again with a young African-American student from Academy Prep. And this was one of the most fascinating days during this whole program. I think we had 150 students touring the museum. And of course, they had no idea that there were going to be therapy dogs there to greet them. And it was such a wonderful moment to see the healing power when you get children and puppies together. One of the things that I had been most interested in when I was researching how to bring well-being into the museum space was something that is becoming more and more popular in Canada and the UK, and that is social prescribing, which allows physicians and therapists to prescribe visits to not only museums, but operas, symphonies, art classes, and lectures to really help people. And there has been so much research done about the mental benefits of art making and art viewing. And we always talk about how museums are a place of solace and calm, but the emerging research is showing that there are so many physical benefits. And I'm really excited about the research that is coming out, especially in Europe, about the physical benefits of art viewing and art making. And I'll just go through some of these. Improvements in physical health, engagement with the brain's pleasure and reward system. There are benefits akin to mild to moderate exercise, such as lowering blood pressure and heart rate. Stimulation of the visual cortex, of course. Reduction in symptoms of anxiety and/or depression. There was a really wonderful pilot program in rural England that showed great results after participants were invited to visit a symphony orchestra. Reduction in social isolation and loneliness, that was something that we were very cognizant of, especially during the pandemic. A lot of our museum visitors and members are elderly, and we were very conscious of that and wanted to make sure that we could do what we can to address it. Increases in self-esteem and confidence, especially when you are art making, and improvements in psychological or mental well-being. So what we did with Museum on Prescription is we have started, we have a small sample size of about 6 different physicians who are allowed to write prescriptions to the museum. And these include family physicians, psychologists, therapists, support group leaders, and physicians from Metro Wellness, which is an LGBTQ wellness center. And what you see on this slide is the physical prescription pad that we created, and someone is holding up in front of a sculpture in our sculpture garden. And we hand out these prescription pads to physicians along with some information about the program, and then samples of some of the material that participants will see when they come to the museum. And this has been a little bit slow rolling out. We have 3 physicians who are incredibly proactive and have gone through a number of prescription pads, but we are not seeing the numbers that we'd like to. So that is in phase 2 of this, we will be addressing that. So what we wanted to do is when people came to the museum, that they had something to focus on and that we would be able to make sure that their visit was impactful as possible. So we created mood tours, and these are mindful explorations through art viewing and art therapy in our museum galleries and gardens. And what you see here on the slide is our display case that is in our welcome gallery in the museum. And it has the 6 different mood tours that we have created with a little bit of information about it. These are all self-guided, and people are able to pick and choose whichever emotional touch point they choose to explore that day. And here we have a close-up of some of the covers. We have joy and celebration, relationships, calm, and self-reflection. So there are 6 different emotional touch points that we decided to explore. And I was lucky enough to work with an art therapist who is local to the area and an artist who had recently graduated from the University of Florida's Arts in Medicine program. And if anyone is interested in exploring this topic, they have one of the most well-renowned programs in the United States. When we were doing all of this research and I would talk to people all over the world, inevitably someone would say, well, have you talked to anyone at UF? Because they're doing really wonderful work, and they are. And we have used them for quite a bit of research, and they have just been incredibly helpful in putting this together. So I sat down with our art therapist and our arts and medicine graduate, and we came up with a list of emotions that we thought people would be interested in exploring or were experiencing at the time. And it will be interesting, I was thinking about this as I was putting the slideshow together, to go back and see what didn't make the cut and how that might be useful in the future. So the 6 that we decided to touch upon were joy and celebration, grief and resilience, calm, empowerment, self-reflection, and relationships. And again, I think this is something that everyone experiences one of these at some point in their lives. So this first one, you know what, I actually want to go back really quickly because I think one of the most exciting things about these mood tours is that it allows people to speak and drive their own well-being journey. I think there are 2 common things when you think about art and medicine, And that is that people often feel they don't have the language to talk about it, that they are not the experts, that there's always someone in charge. There's always someone who has more authority. So if you think about a physician, you go to a physician's office and they tell you, here is what is wrong with you and here is how we'll fix it. When you go to a museum, you trust the experts to tell you what you see on the wall and how you should experience it. But these mood tours allow patients and visitors to take that experience into their own hands and say, I would like to focus on this emotion or this mood, and I will drive that experience. So here's one of the first ones that we did, which is Joy and Celebration. And each mood tour features 6 different works of art that are hanging in our galleries. And this one is Georgia O'Keeffe's Poppy. It's a painting from 1927. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you see a close-up of this really beautiful and vibrant poppy that Georgia O'Keeffe painted. It's bright red and it has some touches of orange at the ends of the flower. There's a beautiful black, oh God, it's not the stamen. I don't even know. I don't know my flowers anymore. And in the background, there's like a blue and white cloud-like background. And what we did when we created these tours is we made sure that we did not talk about the art historical aspects of these. We wanted people to come at it in the most accessible way possible and really think about the emotions that they see when they look at one of these paintings. And I'll just read a little bit of this here. A formalist at heart, O'Keeffe's detailed examination of a single flower asserts that the form is more interesting than the subject. How do you feel this image of one flower amplifies the intensity of the emotions? With its unfurling red and oranges, there's a celebratory air to Poppy. Looking closely at the shapes and colors, what do you see that speaks to a celebratory or joyous mood? And one of the things that I loved most about putting these short essays together is that we were able to work with the curators on staff, as well as the art therapist, to come up with a really wonderful blend that allowed us to talk about everything that you see in this painting. Flowers are often given to mark a joyous occasion. Can you imagine a recent moment, or look to one in the future where you would bring an exuberant single flower such as this? And we tried to end each essay on some sort of action-driven activity that would allow for a little bit more engagement with the painting rather than just looking at it and describing it. So kind of putting yourself in a position where you can imagine picking up this flower and taking it somewhere. So one of the things, and Monica, last night you had sent around a list of discussion points, and one of them was, how do museum professionals engage with medicine and wellness when that's not our area of expertise? And this is certainly something that came to the fore when our art therapist said, it's not art therapy unless there's an activity. So for each mood tour, we created an activity. And this is one of my favorites. Again, it's with the Joy and Celebration. And the art activity is based on a painting by the artist Charles McGee. And what you see here is a detail of the painting, and it has candy strewn around on a tabletop. There's this really beautiful and sophisticated kind of 1950s, 1960s color palette. It looks like some party favors and some berries in a bowl, and maybe some gift wrapping and some peanuts. It's just a really beautiful, joyous painting. And the art activity is that the participant is invited to create their own party invitation. So it says, "You are invited. Please join us for a party celebrating da-da-da, date and time, location. While gifts are not necessary, in the spirit of good cheer, we encourage you to bring any of the following items or activities to share." And then they have an opportunity to create their own menu and offer up a dress code. And this is a really wonderful way to create, again, kind of put yourself in the possession of the art, create a tactile connection to the artworks, and provide an outlet to process your connection and emotions to that. And also take yourself out of the museum and put yourself into the world that is created around the mood tour that you've taken. Okay, so now we're gonna seesaw a little bit emotionally, and we'll go to our grief and resilience mood tour, and this is one of the pieces in it. And this is a painting by Daniel Vertonghen, The Expulsion from Paradise from 1650. And this is something that I would have only felt comfortable exploring in the hands of, or under the guidance of, our art therapist, who were really wonderful in talking through ways to really tackle some heavy emotions when you are taking one of these mood tours. It was important to us to recognize also that during the pandemic, there was a lot of grieving in our community, and that we wanted to focus on the grief, but also the resilience and hope that can come from that. And I'll just read a little bit of this. So what this painting by Daniel Vertonghen is, it shows Adam and Eve being expelled from the Garden of Eden, and there is an angel who is driving them out. And the essay says, rejection, regret, and shame are some of the unmistakable emotions in the small but vivid description of Adam and Eve being cast out of the Garden of Eden. At times we have all felt, not fessed, some of these feelings. This can create an almost insurmountable emotional wall separating us from belonging or feeling love. These intense emotions can manifest physical pain, as shown by Adam, hunched over, unable to even look at either the angel or Eve as they exit paradise. Dwelling in these feelings only perpetuate pain and loss, increasing the feeling of isolation. Releasing these feelings in positive ways can help reframe a new way forward. Take the time now, while looking at this image, to develop a set of actions that will cultivate wellness and strength, and leave regret behind. And this art therapy activity, we have a gravestone from the Roman imperial period in our antiquities gallery. And what we invited people to do was to create their own memorial, acknowledging a loss or an obstacle that they were facing at the time. And this again kind of goes back to, you become the expert. You don't have to worry about it being beautiful. You can use images and text. You can just write what you feel if you want. And it is a way to facilitate moving away from grief and toward resilience and healing. After people took one of our mood tours, we wanted to make sure that they had an opportunity to reflect on their experience. And the University College London has done really, really astonishing research. They've been conducting this research for almost 10 years now. And they have created what they called a well-being questionnaire that is designed to determine the impact of museum visitation and programs on people's well-being. Theirs is pretty lengthy, and we decided to adapt ours, a shorter version of it, to people who participate in our mood tours. And as we set these out and people started to fill them out, we realized that they're available to everyone, that they should be available to every museum visitor. So even if you don't participate in a mood tour, or you are not there at using a physician's prescription, we encourage people to fill them out. And this has been incredibly popular. I think we're actually on our second printing of these now, and we get a lot of feedback from them. We've also set up a kiosk so that they, if people don't feel like writing or they're not available, that you can fill this out online. And here is the cover. Tell us how you really feel. And there are some emotional touch points that we speak about in our mood tours: resilience, grief, happiness, strength, health, love, celebration, power, friends, and joy. And this is on our signature MFA goldenrod. And here is the inside of one of our Tell Us How You Really Feel brochures. There's a kind of screenshot of the front of the museum, and then a list of the mood tours that people are allowed to check off which one they did if they would like to. They can also check off if they did not take a mood tour. And then the questions we ask are: entering the museum for my visit, I felt. And there are a few lines that we allow people to fill out or encourage people to fill out. Question 2 is: as I visited the museum, I felt engaged. Some of the time, none of the time, all of the time. Looking at the art or taking part in tours, I felt comfortable. Again, we allow people to tell us how often that impacted them. I felt that my visit allowed me to safely explore my thoughts and emotions. And this is one of the most illuminating questions because there's such a diversity in answers there. So that I think that in our next iteration of these brochures, we're going to ask people to dwell on that and elaborate a little bit more. Working on the art activity, if applicable, allowed me to understand and articulate my thoughts and feelings. And it's interesting that out of all of the mood tours that have been taken, people don't turn them in. They've been given that opportunity. They're instructed to bring it back to the visitor services desk, but no one has taken us up on that. And I think they just take them home with them. And then we ask people to tell us how they felt leaving the museum. So the next steps in this program, it's been going on for about 8 months now, and we're at a point where we've collected enough data. And I apologize, but my dog just rang the back door. He wants to go outside, so I'm going to ignore him for one moment. So now that we have some data collected from the Tell Us How You Really Feel brochures and anecdotes that we have from physicians and from some of the activities that we've done with different groups and have received immediate feedback, we have enough information to re-examine our visitor experience. One of the things that we have started is to reach out to veterans hospitals and different support groups. There we have a huge veterans hospital not far from the museum, and we have been talking to people there about bringing in people in the traumatic brain injury support group, which I think would be incredibly beneficial. And then there's also a bipolar and schizophrenia support group that I've been working with, and they're going to bring their members in conjunction with our Picture of Health program. We also began participating in the Museums for All program, which allows people who receive SNAP or EBT benefits to come to the museum free of charge. And that is something that we're making sure that people know about as we reach out to these different groups so that it is as accessible as possible to everyone. We are also working with a group of foster families to see if they can bring their children in. One of the things that I have noticed is that this is really beneficial. These mood tours specifically, I always envision them as just someone coming in and taking the tour, but as a group activity and a multi-generational activity, it has been really wonderful to see the healing that can take place then. And I'm also interested in creating digital tours. Maybe that is a way for people to experience it differently. And we have some devices that we can use for that. We also are working with a marketing firm. They have volunteered to take this on as a project. So they are looking at it holistically to see what improvements they might suggest. And I look forward to hearing all of that feedback from them. And that is our Picture of Health program. I'm incredibly excited that we have been able to offer this to our community and to see how well it has supported the mental well-being of museum visitors and staff members as well. And I really look forward to the next steps that we take in this journey. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Margaret. This is Monica again. I'm so inspired. I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. And I just, for organizational purposes, want to point out to folks that I think we have until about 12:30. So we are going to jump right into welcoming Ross Laird to round out our presentations for today, looking at some broader case studies in the field. And we will follow that with whatever time is left, but we want Ross to take all the time Ross wants. We will circle back to some questions that you might have or that have come up as these panelists have presented together. So feel free to please drop those questions as you have them into the Q&A space, and I will make sure to get them in front of our panelists if I can. So without further ado, welcome, Ross.
Thank you for that kind introduction, Monica, and hello, everybody. I want to say thanks to the previous presenters. Super inspiring work, and as I've listened, I keep wanting to add things to my portion because so much of what I'm hearing resonates with the kind of work that I'm doing, and so much of us seem to be wanting to do right now. It's really lovely for me to hear all the great work that's being done. My name is Ross Laird. I'm a roughly 60-year-old man with short gray hair. I'm wearing glasses and a purple office type shirt. I'm sitting in my home office. There are some books and a couch behind me. I'm coming to you from Canada, the lands now known as Canada, as we often say in Canada. The western part of Canada, Vancouver, is where I live. And in my part of the world, in Western Canada, we use the term Unseated Territories to refer to the fact that there are hundreds of First Nations, Indigenous communities. We use the term First Nations. I think sometimes that's used in the US as well. But it refers to the fact that there are many communities of Indigenous people, especially in the western part of Canada, who did not sign treaties with the government during the period of expansion, colonial expansion. And so we're still undergoing really interesting and often traumatic conversations about the meaning and purpose of indigenization and decolonization. And you know, I think that would be a good place for me to start, I think, because I have just a few hours gotten off the plane from Ottawa, the capital of Canada, in the eastern part of Canada, where I have been working with the Canadian Museum of History and the Canadian War Museum. The Canadian Museum of History has recently opened an exhibition that explores the intergenerational trauma of Indigenous peoples as the result of the residential school system in Canada, which operated for a long period, and is the subject of, I think, what is the most pressing social issue in this country. And when visitors will walk through, this exhibition just opened, and when exhibitors walk through it, they're going to be exposed potentially to scenes and objects that could be highly traumatic for people to experience. And so the question becomes, what is the ethical obligation of the museum in terms of helping people to navigate these challenges, not only in terms of their exposure to emotionally activating content, but also how to move the conversation forward? How can the museum be a place that promotes social change and healing and growth? And so we've done a whole bunch of things that we're about a year into this project now, and my role has been to assist the museum in thinking about the the psychotherapeutic opportunities here. I'm a psychotherapist by training and by practice, and I just work with organizations. I don't work with individual clients. And many of those organizations are museums and cultural institutions and indigenous communities and so on. So at this particular museum, one of the things we've done, which has been really fun, is we have taught frontline museum staff basic counseling skills. So they're having, even before this current exhibition, they've been having increasingly the experience as they've waded into more complex issues like climate change or systemic racism, many complex issues of our day. Museums are thinking about, what do we do about these? And so the Canadian Museum of History has been doing more and more of this type of work, and their frontline staff are noticing that they're having to deal with emotional issues of visitors all the time. And so what do we do, right? Very few psychotherapists work in the museum context yet, but there's a lot going on and a lot of need for visitors to have somebody to interact with in a moment where they might be very emotional. So we did a project earlier this year where we trained, I think, about 45, 50 frontline museum staff, people with no training whatsoever in counseling or psychotherapy, no context at all for this kind of thing. And we trained them to deal with, a panic attack, or somebody who's crying uncontrollably, or someone who's really angry when they enter, when an Indigenous person enters a gallery where objects have been taken from their ancestors and placed in a museum, right? So this has been really interesting work and fun work for me to do, and very purposeful, for me. So I'm just going to share a few minutes of sort of similar examples, other things that I've been involved in. And just to give you a sense of some of what has been interesting for me. You'll notice that this slide that I'm sharing here is in English and French. The French is at the top. And the reason for that is I wanted to give you a little taste of Canada. Canada is a bilingual country by constitution. The Canadian Constitution provides special rights for French speakers and also for Indigenous people. And so in Canada, in the work that I do here, slides always must be in English and in French. I thought I would continue that. And also there may be people in our group who speak French. So this slide says trauma-informed museum practices, which is the term that I'm using in my consulting with museums, pretty much in many places. Trauma-informed is the clinical term that people use in the psychotherapy world, in my experience. And this trauma-informed lens or trauma-informed perspective is increasingly moving into the museum space, which I'll explore in a moment. My contact info is there, rosslaird.com. My email, ross@rosslaird.com. And I'm also on Twitter occasionally at rosslaird. So the way I kind of would think about coalescing all this stuff is in terms of layers of experience, right? People bring these layers of experience to the museum when visitors, or also people who interact with objects that are donated to the museum. They have this resonant backstory from history, culture, family, gender, race, all kinds of things contribute to this really rich backstory people bring in. We never know what that backstory is when they come into the museum and how they might be impacted by objects they see. They also bring their responses, their trauma responses, flight, freeze, fight, orient responses, or often responses that are kind of locked into the nervous system of people. There's a very interesting way in which trauma therapy, which is my area of specialty, has kind of spread out, and I don't know, it's occupied all the other areas of psychotherapy now. So much of psychotherapy is about trauma now, which I think is great, because trauma is the root of most things. Most of the struggle and vulnerability and frailty of people, emotionally speaking, often has roots in trauma, and people bring their mental health adaptations also. I don't use the term mental illness because it's complicated, but mental health adaptations, the ways in which they have learned to keep these locked trauma responses going, or they've tried to keep themselves safe in a variety of ways. And then also, addiction is often a part of our landscape we don't talk about. It's super important. It's the most common human frailty. Many of us, well, everybody, right? Think about your own life. You have somebody in your life who's addicted. You may yourself have an addiction. It's super, super common, and all these issues, right? These resonant backstories, these trauma responses, these mental health adaptations, and these addictions are all swirling around inside of people when they go to a museum. And we don't know them yet enough to know how they might react to situations. So my colleagues and I have been exploring this quite a bit over the last few years. We wrote a book about this, Museum Objects, Health and Healing. And this slide shows that book cover along with a short description. We traveled around the world and worked with various museums, the 9/11 Museum, the Derby Museum, the Happy Museum in the UK, the War Childhood Museum in Sarajevo, in Europe. We were really lucky and blessed to work with the founders of social prescribing in the UK. Margaret mentioned the work of University College London, and that work is primarily led by Helen Chatterjee, who we worked with quite a bit, and Tony Butler, the founder of the Happy Museum project in the UK. So we spent, 3 or 4 years doing case studies and research with museums that want to do this kind of therapeutic work. We would often say, well, it's not therapy, but it can be therapeutic. And so these case studies looked different depending on the museum. Sometimes they involved people bringing objects in, objects that were personal to them. Sometimes they involved people interacting with objects in the museum, having reactions to them. Sometimes they involved specific thematic elements in museum exhibitions that were designed to evoke emotion. And my role in this research group was to bring the kind of trauma lens. And so the chapter in this book that's about trauma and trauma healing is by me. And this was a really fun project. It introduced us to many people who are doing interesting work around the world. And I would say that the recent massive increase in interest in this kind of thing is so heartening to see. And Mark made the point too, as well, that social prescribing is a part of this conversation. Subsequent to this Museum Objects, Health and Healing book, I worked directly with Helen Chatterjee and her group at University College London and contributed a chapter to this book, Object-Based Learning and Well-Being, which is about specifically how might we do this, right, in different contexts. So social prescribing, and it's kind of this great idea where it's taking therapy out of the therapy room and into a space where people are not therapists, but they can learn to be empathic, to provide active listening, to be emotionally supportive. And that's what we're doing at the Canadian Museum of History and other places where I have other projects going on. It's super fun work. My chapter in this book is about taking people outside, taking people out into nature. And it actually grows out of work that I did with Janet Roseman at the Arts and Medicine program in Florida that Margaret also mentioned. So, all these little networks of people are interconnected in various ways. And that's part of what's so fun and inspiring for me. I get to work with the same people again and meet new people. And it's super fun for me and purposeful, right? I feel like this work makes a difference, especially for many young people who, they don't necessarily want to go to therapy or counseling. And they can't afford it, or it's not available to them. And so they will do something out in the community, right? They'll go to a museum, they'll go to a concert, they'll go to the park. I teach a class where we just go to the park, university class on well-being. And so this work for me has looked, all kinds of different ways, but my primary motivation, my primary interest is in how can we use, especially creativity, as a path toward health and healing in contexts that are therapeutic, but not therapy. And I would say that if I were to distill all that work down into a couple of final slides, it would be stuff like this, right? How can we create essential experiences for people? And I would say that the 4 essential experiences that I tend to use, they build on the 4 locked response patterns to trauma: flight, freeze, orient, and fight. They build on the common mental health challenges, dissociation, depression, anxiety, and anger. They build on top of the common four addictions to elsewhere, addictions to freezing, addictions to kind of orienting, and alcohol, addiction to anger. So that's a longer conversation than we have for here, but I tend to kind of focus on what the research shows about what people need for healing. And it's really basic, right? Obviously, it's basic. They need a sense of belonging. They need to be able to trust people. They need emotional safety. And they need some kind of empowerment so they can move the healing forward into real world action. And so a lot of this work is about training people and assisting programs to do that kind of thing. And so I just have a couple of short examples. This slide here shows 3 images from the Derby Museum, where we did a project with them and with the Happy Museum project in the UK. That's in the center of England, Derby. We did a project where we invited people to interact with sacred objects, to be able to touch a 50,000-year-old saber-toothed tiger skull, to be able to hold objects that were normally under glass, and to be able to express their feelings about those things right in the gallery on sticky notes or through interviews. And the image on the left shows the gallery in general, the World Cultures Gallery, and the 2 images on the right show objects that people brought to the museum, objects of love. That was our theme, objects that are associated with love, to reflect and express, how these objects were of meaning to them. And then we took these objects and put them in the gallery. And it was super fun. So those kinds of things, really basic things, right? It's not therapy, but it's super therapeutic, as you can tell from the very wide open, enthusiastic facial expressions in the images on the right. And then, building on that slide from a couple of slides back, belonging, trust, safety, and empowerment. The image on the left here shows, I don't know what you call it. I know there's a word for this, entomology maybe, but bugs. There's a display of bugs like beetles, and then if you look near the bottom right of this circular image, there's a little picture, a little hand-drawn picture from a child of a bug. And so the curators of this gallery, they explicitly went to great lengths to include visitor-created objects behind the glass, along with the sacred special museum objects. They were very transgressive about this, and it was fantastic. It was so fun to see these simple handmade objects by visitors, actually, with these other sacred objects. And then the middle images shows me interviewing a participant who brought an object, and building relationship with visitors in a therapeutic kind of way. And the third image on the right, which says safety, shows the 50,000-year-old saber-toothed tiger skull that people were invited to actually touch and feel and hold in the gallery. So we've done all these kinds of projects that are kind of like this, where you think about, we've thought about how do we create therapeutic experiences in a non-therapeutic environment, using cultural heritage especially, and creative practices that people can bring and do. And whether that's, interacting with ancient objects like 2,000-year-old lantern, which is an example on the left, giving people choice about how they interact with things, or reminders of resilience, which is the image on the right, showing the palm of one of our participants at the 9/11 Museum and a small piece of steel from one of the towers. So this kind of working with the hand has become very important in that work. Yeah, and 30 more seconds for me. In this training work, it's been important to shape skill for museum staff, right? Helping people understand that there are also risks. There are also risks that people might get emotionally activated and bad things can happen. And so the museum has an ethical obligation to take care of people and to give them signage like here that says, please take care of yourself. You decide how much you see. If you need a break, go over here. And I'll show that on the next slide. If you have a reaction, it's okay. If you don't have a reaction, it's okay. Learn and be safe. So that has led to this kind of empathy training that I talked about at the outset, which has been very fun for me to do. And also to the creation of safe space. in museums. People need a safe space to go and sit and reflect and get away from it if they need to be able to draw and paint or journal or whatever it is. And so I put a lot of effort into kind of helping museums to create these kind of spaces and to train these kind of people. And I think if you have these two things, safe people and safe spaces, then you can do basically whatever you want in the museum context with emotionally activating content. It provides safe containment, to use the technical term from the trauma research, provides safe containment, safe as possible containment for this kind of stuff. Okay, I'm going to stop there because I know we're running out of time and we do need to have some time for questions. So I'm going to stop sharing here and just return back to Monica.
Here I am. Thank you so much, Ross. This is Monica on the screen again. We do have time to discuss. We don't have a ton, but we have 10 minutes, which I think is either one really good, big, juicy question that everybody responds to, or perhaps a chance to answer some specific and logistical questions from the audience. So audience, if you have them, send them our way, put them in the chat or the Q&A, or use the 9 function that Katie Sampson described earlier. If I could ask our other panelists to join us on the screen, Ross and I are still visible. Yolanda has joined us, Margaret is back on. Hopefully we'll get Tripita in just a moment. And I had circulated a few questions for all of you last night. We're not going to get to all of those, obviously. And I'm also appreciative that a number of you sort of wove in some of how you were thinking about that to your presentations. But I thought while we waited to see if there were any specific questions from our audience, that it occurs to me one of the best questions I might be able to ask each of you on behalf of the audience today, who might now feel galvanized to advocate for this type of work at an organization that they are involved with, is that first one I asked you to think about, which is about the thorny issue of outcomes. Because each of you talked about, or at least I think I heard you talk about sort of some of the ways in which you're measuring success or impact. But it occurs to me that we have a unique opportunity today. Usually I hear this conversation being had in the cultural space, and everybody in that conversation agrees that the work is great, but doesn't know how to prove it to the clinicians. And in this scenario, we actually have a number of people who represent both sides of that, who come from the trained world of clinical therapy or healthcare in some way. And I'm interested how you all would help somebody who wants to advocate for this think about outcomes. In particular, what kind of outcomes do you think are reasonable or fair to expect of these types of programs? And what do you see as the distraction conversations around that when advocating in various spaces for that? Anybody interested in taking that on? Ross?
I just want to say quickly that an avalanche of this kind of outcomes research that's been done in the UK with the Alliance for Arts and Culture there, Helen Chatterjee's group. I mean, they have done no end of research, and it's all outcomes based. And so if people are looking for how do we demonstrate this stuff is useful, you don't have to like reinvent the wheel, as we say. That stuff's been done.
I agree with Ross. The brochure, the Tell Us How You Really Feel brochure, came out of some of that same research, and there's so much, and it was just a matter for us of adapting it to our programs. And as we move into phase 2, I just found out last week that we've received another round of funding to continue this program. So we're going to look at we're going to dive into the information that we've already collected and see what will help us in the future. And for us, it is really about impact and not attendance. Our museum is still, like many museums, our attendance isn't where it was pre-pandemic levels. So we are definitely more concerned with how people feel when they leave the museum than anything else.
Hmm. That's really interesting. Is there anything about this that you want to say from the world of poetry? I do not want to put you on the spot, but I also don't want to miss Yolanda and Tripita's thoughts on this. I imagine it is a bit different to think about when you're not operating inside also the system of the museum specifically.
Yeah, well, we're collecting information. I think what Yolanda showed with the numbers, those are really important information. I think as we dig deeper, and Yolanda can speak on that more because it's coming through the Philadelphia Contemporary end. The first year of the project, it was more, we didn't really measure it as solidly, I think, as Philadelphia Contemporary is doing now. But the data that we are collecting will inform just what the project looks like in the future, but also hopefully funding to support the project. And I know Yolanda has a couple more details on that.
Yeah, I think from our angle, we're interested in reach, like how the reach of how we can extend the reach of the phone line and access to the phone line. So those numbers on social media and those call-in numbers are really important to consider for us. But I also just think the anecdotal, as a poet, the anecdotal will always kind of be important to me. The stories from the pre-K teacher or the suicide line. And that's a kind of data that I'm after with this particular project that I think really echoes the intent behind poetry in general. That if this is a project that is creating more stories or giving folks greater voice or opportunities to voice connection in building community building, I think that's an impact that we're trying to make and capture.
Yeah, I think that's right. But I also, to your point, Yolanda, know that all of us at some point also get trapped in answering these questions for the external report, for the funder with the funder's own priorities. And sometimes that also means please recreate the research at your own institution with your own project that's already been done in the UK. And I know sometimes it's a resource tension, I think, for a lot of us, because we know it's good. We saw the science. So maybe I might ask you a big future pointing question as our last question to wrap up, because I know we're almost at 12:30. But Ross, you asserted something in one of your questions and also in your presentation today that I'd like the group to speak to, which is that you, I think, made the thesis that, museums, and I might expand that to cultural organizations to speak to the whole group that we have today, that you said they have an ethical obligation to take this on. And I'm wondering if, as our closing remarks, you could all think about sort of what you think the ethical obligations of our cultural landscape is moving forward. Is this something that all museums must take on, all cultural organizations? Is it just if you have a type of content? Sort of, what do you feel the ethical obligation is of our space in the next, and how we evolve in the next 10 years?
Are you asking everybody?
I'm asking everybody.
Yeah. I think we have my 30 seconds is I think we have an ethical obligation in two ways. One is we have an ethical obligation to take care of people who we are deliberately inviting into spaces that are emotionally activating. And the other is that museums as places of social care, right, as places of social justice are foundational. And so I think we have an ethical obligation in that way also to move the conversation about systemic racism and climate change and indigeneity and decolonization. We need to move that more and more into the museum space because these are places that have in some ways enshrined these issues. And so to deconstruct those issues requires a museum world.
I love that. I also think that these cultural organizations, institutions have an obligation to share the incredible resources and space that they have access to with other organizations that are perhaps doing work that is closer to the communities that we're all trying to serve. And to leverage those resources in partnership with those organizations, true partnership that really is mutually beneficial. because there's so many, you know, there museums, cultural institutions have access to funding, resources, networks that are not always shared and not always open, not always known to organizations that have been built in non-traditional ways or have been built out of just a desire to serve the community, to respond to what the community needs and what it needs at that moment. So I think, yeah, we need to get on the same page with the organizations that are on the front lines and doing the work, and, you know, and trying to provide the basic needs to survive and to be sustainable.
And I will just, while Margaret's thinking about how she wants to answer that, also point out that I think it surprises me not at all, Yolanda, that you believe that, because I think Philadelphia Contemporary is actually modeling how to do that in a lot of really interesting ways, taking its position in the world and making sure that it is connecting with all of those orgs on the ground in communities and in neighborhoods. And I think it's really impressive. So yes, you are near and dear to my heart with that belief. Margaret, last thoughts on this?
I mean, I have nothing to add except that I agree with what everyone has said. Collaboration is key in this regard. And if every single museum in the world could adapt a trauma-informed practice, I think that we would serve our communities very well.
Yeah, I could not agree more. Oh, and here we are. Look, we've reached 12:30. We see Katie. Welcome, Katie.
Hi, I don't want to end this conversation, but I recognize that, you know, we committed to this time, and I know you all are very, very busy people. So I just want to mention to any of our attendees, if there are questions that we can help funnel through to our presenters, we'd be more than happy to do that. An email will go out to all of our attendees, as well as those that have registered but were unable to attend live. We also will be broadcasting this recorded session on YouTube. And so we hope that you can please share that out with other networks and other communities. I want to thank Monica Zimmerman, Ross Laird, Yolanda Wisher, Margaret Murray, Tripita B. Mason, our ASL interpreters from Hands Up Productions, our CART captioner for DHCC, to tune in to more opportunities involved in cultural access forum and exchange. You can check out our website at www.art-reach.org/accessible-resources. I recognize that we are all deeply committed and impassioned about this work, but I think the best that we can do is to really galvanize other organizations to step up. And as Ross said so well, the work has been done. The studies are out, and it's pick up that book, reach out to these folks here, because if anything that yes, thank you, Monica. Monica is displaying the book in her screen. So I want to thank you all so much. This has been an incredibly heartwarming conversation. And so I'll invite our panelists to unmute and say goodbye, but thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Goodbye,
everyone.
everybody.
Bye.
Wonderful.
Thanks for being here.
Call the phone line, 1-855-POEM-RX2.